Good evening and welcome. Today is August 25th. I just checked the comments and someone asked if I've watched the movie The Great War of Archimedes. I actually have. They did a great job depicting the battleship Yamato. It made me buy some plastic model kits of the ship's parts, like the bridge and main battery. Couldn't help it. And what else? Well, I guess I'm looking forward to watching the new Tarantino movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If I tell you why I want to watch it, I'd be spoiling the movie for you all. But apparently the trailer doesn't give anything away. So people who watch it with no prior knowledge are pretty lucky. And some commented, Ghibli again? Well, actually yes. TV programs only talk about the Olympics when they're held, right? It's sort of like that. It's like a meteorological disaster, you know? If a Ghibli movie is on TV on a Friday night, you should know that I'll be talking about it here soon after. It's inevitable, so please resign yourself to the idea. So yeah, today I'll mainly talk about the Ghibli movie Ponyo. But look, starting today, I'll be using this new cup holder. I was in Los Angeles last week and I visited Cars Land, the Disney theme park inspired by the Pixar movie Cars. I got this there. At Cars Land, I bought Diet Coke. When you buy a Diet Coke for about $10, they give you a special cup like this. I used to have a cup that looked like a Dynaco motor oil can, but this one here is called the Piston Cup and looks like the trophy given to the winner of the Piston Cup in Cars. They really paid attention to the details. Like, look at this curve. This is because the piston inside the engine would move like this. So here's the piston cylinder, and under it, there's a curve. I actually love this cup because of these little details that make it much more real. Of course, I had to visit the Galaxy's Edge as well. It's a theme park for Star Wars fans. Look, here's proof. This is the best selfie I could take. There, my face is right in the middle, but if you look closer, you can see the cockpit and the fuselage of the Starship Millennium Falcon. Look at this. It's really well made. It's actually the same size as in the movie, you know? So it's quite impressive. The ship that appears in the movie was built in Elstree Studios, I think, in Great Britain. And this is a life-size replica of that. I mean, having built D'Agostini's huge model kit of the Millennium Falcon, I thought I already knew all the nooks and crannies. But even for me, there were moments like, so that's how this part works. I went inside too. It's like this inside. Here's the didgeridoo board. And if you go further in, you see things like the ship's corridors and hatch. And the quality was just mind-blowing. The Millennium Falcon's long corridors are sort of cushioned all over and shaped like rings of donuts. I could actually walk in those corridors and was really touched. I'll talk about that and about my trip in more detail in September on Nico Nico, Japan's video hosting site. So I got in line for the Galaxy Edge one evening, and I only had to wait for half an hour. The line kept moving quickly, and soon I was inside. If you tried to enter the Harry Potter theme park in Japan, or one of those Toy Story lands, you'd have to wait for 2 or 3 hours. But this wasn't anything like that. It seems like it could be a sign that Star Wars isn't popular nowadays, but honestly I had a blast because the quality was amazing. I got some souvenirs for you all. I will announce how you can apply toward the end of the video. It would be too cumbersome if I asked you to apply through email. The thing is, I brought back many souvenirs this time. So I set up an online form specifically for this purpose. This way, you only have to fill it out. So stay tuned for more information towards the end. Alright. Let's talk about this week's Natsuzora, a TV series on Japan's national broadcaster NHK. I have 2 weeks worth of episodes to talk about. On the Monday before last, we saw it had moved on to the year 1967. Natsu, the protagonist, has moved to a new house in the Nishi Ogikubo district in Tokyo. She started working on this anime called Ally the Witch, which is exactly like Sally the Witch from the 60s. Even the sequence she was drawing looked identical to the opening theme of Sally the Witch, where she flicks her wand. It was funny. And the company's already decided to commercialize this wand. Smart move. Anyway, Natsu has turned 30 years old. Several new studios dedicated to animated TV series have popped up besides Mushi Production and Oriental Animation. As we can see from the new series Little Monster, obviously an imitation of The Monster Kid, anime is becoming mainstream. So with anime gaining popularity, each TV channel, like TBS for example, starts to create its own animated series by outsourcing their production to animation studios. Although, I forgot the specific names of the produced anime. As a result, many new studios emerge, churning out animated series one after another. And then, we see this character, Mako, again. She's founded her own animation studio, Mako Production, as we see on her business card. Now, if you look closely, it says her studio is located in the neighborhood of Kichijoji in Tokyo. That caught my eyes, but on top of this, it says West Kichijoji. Now that's really neat. I'll explain. Kichijoji in Musashinoshi City is divided into quarters of south, east, and north, but it doesn't have a west. If you go west, you'll enter the city of Mitaka. So it was pretty neat to see that her office was located in this imaginary quarter, West Kichijoji of Musashino City. Anyway, Mako Production is probably modeled on Tokyo Movie, an animation studio that actually existed in the Nishi Ogikubo district. One of its works was Lupin the Third. Just take a look at the project Mako Production is working on. It's called Capone the Third. I mean, anyone could tell it's based on Lupin the Third. Well, Mako is at a loss because her project isn't progressing. It's waiting for the green light. Its model, Lupin the Third, was first broadcast in the fall of 1971. So it'll still take a while. At the time, Tokyo Movie was raking it in thanks to the success of its animated TV series, Star of the Giants. So, no matter how many times she tries to persuade her bosses that her project will find an audience in adults, they'll keep demanding the same type of series as Star of the Giants, a world of sports where the protagonist pours blood, sweat, and tears into his training as an aspiring athlete. That's why they're reluctant to give the green light to a project like Lupin the Third. Or rather, Capone the Third, I guess. It goes to show that this idea of anime for adults still hasn't caught on. Personally, the past 2 weeks of Natsuzora bored me to death, to the point that I had to double the playback speed at times to make it go faster. I mean, what's the point of focusing on the protagonist's pregnancy and childbirth? These are hackneyed, commonplace topics that can be found anywhere. Up till now, Natsuzora was quite interesting. In my opinion, there are only two ways for a series to be an absolute hit. Either you tell a novel story in an ordinary way, or you tell an ordinary story in a novel way. You can't tell a novel story in a novel way because that'd be too extreme. And you can't tell an ordinary story in an ordinary way because that'd be too boring. As for Natsuzora, the way the story is told couldn't be more cliche. The screenwriter doesn't use any new method to tell the story, nor does he have to. But Natsuzora was interesting because it dealt with a novel topic, the dawning of the anime boom. So it told a novel story in an ordinary way. But if you start to deal with well-worn themes, like the anguish of a working mother, while you continue to tell the story in the same ordinary way, of course, it's going to become boring. And when a series becomes boring, it starts to rely heavily on actors. But at that point, it really can't be saved. An interesting story would make an interesting series, regardless of the acting. But if it starts relying too much on characters or actors who play these roles, a series suddenly stops being interesting. But I'm actually looking forward to next week's episodes because we saw in the preview that it will focus on the year 1970, 1 year after Natsu gave birth to her daughter. Apollo 11's landing on the moon happened in 1969, and Osaka hosted Expo 70. So Japan should be in a celebratory mood, though we don't really see it. Natsu is now 33 years old, and in the preview, we get a glimpse of a new striking animated series. It's obviously about boxing. I think it's safe to assume that it's modeled on Ashita no Joe, also known as Tomorrow's Joe. Although this sketch is so low quality, I can't tell for sure. But in reality, Ashita no Joe was made by Mushi Productions, so it probably won't be produced by Natsu nor Mako in the episode. Mushi Production will probably make Ashita no Joe or Tiger Mask or Kick no Oni, also known as the Demon of Kickboxing, and it'll herald the boom of sports anime. Up until now, animated TV series were supposed to be for kids, but the trend changed, and all of a sudden the whole animation industry began to make sports anime. So I suspect this will influence Natsu and Mako in some way. Maybe a new project will pop up, or maybe the project they've been working on, like Capone III, will be rejected. As I said earlier, Star of the Giants, which started in 1968, was a major hit. This is about a year after Natsu gave birth. She's been on maternity leave, and her husband is just about to go back to the anime industry. So, I suspect they haven't fully grasped how big of a success Star of the Giants has been, because they've been absent from the forefront of the industry. We also saw Natsu's daughter Yu. In the preview of next week's episode, she was just a baby this week. But in the preview, she may be about 3 years old, or even as old as 5. In that case, I suspect next week's Natsuzora will fast forward to as far as the year 1975. Why this specific year? Well, because so much was happening in 75. I actually doubt that it'll go beyond that year. There are only 5 weeks left of Natsuzora, and I think it'll concentrate on the 3 years or so leading up to 1975. Because after 75, some big-name anime series and films started to appear. Future Boy Conan in 78, Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, and Mobile Suit Gundam in 79. Natsu will be 40 years old, and her daughter Yu will be 9 or 10. It'll become harder to depict Natsu's relationship with a grown daughter like that. Plus, the series and films I just mentioned are too famous and popular for Natsu to remain at the center of the story. In short, some issues will start to appear. The last episode will be on the 28th of September, so there are only 5 weeks to wrap it all up. Natsu's husband needs to achieve great success in the industry. the title Natsuzora should be given some meaning. And to top it all off, Natsu should be reunited with her long-lost sister for the grand finale. All these things need to happen in only 5 weeks. I'm so looking forward to it. Many anime appeared in the years leading up to 1975. When Natsu was in her 30s, given that Lupin III by Tokyo Movie was broadcast in 71, there will probably be some developments around Capone III. Mazinger Z in 72, Natsu will be 35 years old. And then Space Battleship Yamato, made by Office Academy, Natsu will be 37. And finally Heidi, Girl of the Alps, I think they will all be part of the climax. Now, let me make some bold predictions for next week's Natsuzora. Like how I predicted Chiharu to come back as Lady Dewi. I think it'll feature the actress Rena Nonen, also known as Non. Based purely on my conjecture, I think she'll make her first appearance on September 4th. And I think she will appear as an antagonist. I think she'll appear because all the previous heroines of previous NHK's TV series have made appearances. Nonen was the heroine of the series Ama-chan, so she should appear too. I'll make another prediction. I think Non will play the role of an anime producer. She will have this bad girl look and wear a pair of sunglasses. Her catchphrase would be, "The theme is love." I predict she will produce an anime series called Space Warship Musashi. In real life, the producer of Space Battleship Yamato, Yoshinobu Nishizaki, was the deputy president of Mushi Production. So, in the world of Natsuzora, I bet Non will appear as Mako's former colleague, an antagonist who tries to stall Mako Productions' projects. She should appear next week, probably on Wednesday or Thursday. And I'm convinced that she'll say, "The theme of Space Warship Musashi is love!" That's it for this week's edition of Cooler Than Real Life Natsuzora, brought to you by yours truly, Toshio Okada. Thank you, I really like this. I want its plastic bottle, but it's so hard to come by. Now, let's talk about the movie Ponyo. In this film, the director Hayao Miyazaki openly depicts his personal view of womanhood, which can be pretty controversial to say the least. His portrayal of women includes some scary details, and since I've been talking about some horror stories like urban legends lately, it's a perfect time to talk about Ponyo in a way that's a little erotic and extremely frightening. So, Grandma Mare is like a goddess of the sea. She's Ponyo's mother and the wife of Fujimoto. This one here is the character Fujimoto, and he's human. This little one at the bow of the ship. And Grandma Mare is huge compared to him. She's serene, kind, and never loses her cool. She's the embodiment of motherhood, if you will. Fujimoto is madly in love with her and gets butterflies in his stomach just at the thought of seeing her. It leads to disaster, of course, exacerbated by the fact that the door doesn't work properly. When Grandma Mare appears for the first time, Sosuke's father... I watched Ponyo 3 times or so, and the only character whose name I can't seem to remember is Sosuke's father. The name of Sosuke's mother is Lisa, I know. But when it comes to his father, the voice actor's name keeps popping into my head. Kazushige Nagashima. That's because the character really fits the public image of this voice actor, like often being absent from home and unreliable. So I'll refer to Sosuke's father as Kazushige, but please don't mind. So, Grandma Mare appears for the first time when she glides past Kazushige's ship underwater. She's ginormous. Kazushige says, "Look!" pointing at the glowing wave approaching them. It's split into 3 panels. I'll start at the top. A glowing wave appears in the sea, and if you look closely, there's something like a red gem right beneath it. Its brightness is its characteristic. This red gem is what's making the wave glow. It glides past right beneath the ship. And right then, you can see that the red gem is... So here's her face, here's her neck, and here's her chest. She's wearing a low-cut dress, and this part of her body, I think the proper term is décolletage, is revealed. And there's a necklace hanging loosely on her chest. That's where this red gem is. So the point is, the reason why the red gem is causing this wave is... Grandma Mare always swims in a sort of backstroke near the surface of the water. But because her boobs are so big, they create waves. Alert! Here come the huge boobs! I guess Miyazaki was having a field day. This scene always struck me as strange, so I went back and paused it to take a closer look. I could see the necklace right beneath the wave. And what else is there? Her boobs! She's swimming backstroke right beneath the water, and her huge boobs stick out in the sea, creating a wave. That's an amazing way to hint at the size of her breasts. But personally, I find her scary. Let me explain. Take a look at this scene. It's about a minute after the previous one. Here's Fujimoto. You can see his little figure at the ship's bow, and his wife, Grandma Mare, pokes out her head. But once he starts talking to Fujimoto, holding his hand and all, she glows and her size shrinks to match his. And this happens while he's telling her what's happened. It looks like she wears the pants in this relationship. So the husband is like, "Look, my wife, I have a problem." And she just listens to him, going, "I don't think that's such a bad thing." While she's just listening to him, she remains huge. But as soon as Fujimoto tells her that Ponyo wants to become human, she tries to persuade him. As she tells him, "That's a very good idea, my love. Let's make her human," she suddenly shrinks to Fujimoto's size and squeezes his hand. Up till then, she remained huge, sort of keeping Fujimoto at arm's length. But when she wants to persuade him, she shrinks to human size and goes all touchy-feely holding his hand. You realize she's using her sex appeal to coax her husband into agreeing with her. That's a bold move, and she's very shrewd indeed. So, let's look at the scene where this huge Grandma Mare shrinks to human size. It's pretty incredible. I've split it into 4 panels. First, she turns around. She sends a sideways glance at Fujimoto, who's on her left. Only the left side of her face is visible to Fujimoto, so that side doesn't change. Meanwhile, the right side of her face begins to shrink. I really encourage those of you who've recorded the movie to go back and check it out for yourselves. You'll see the right side of her face beginning to shrink, the side Fujimoto can't see. Then she turns to face him. And now, look at this third panel. Now, both sides of her face are the same size, but she's still a giant from the neck down, while only her face is human size. So her face and neck just don't seem to match. And then, when she suddenly draws very close to Fujimoto, her body finally becomes well proportioned, though her neck is still a tad long. In this scene, Grandma Mare's monstrosity, I guess you can call it, is depicted with such careful detail. When I was watching, I thought for a second, wait, did they do a sloppy job? But there's just no way they would be sloppy when such an important character makes her first appearance, especially in slow motion like that. The right side of her face begins to shrink, followed by her whole face. It's disproportionate to her still long neck. But then the rest of her body shrinks and becomes well proportioned as she draws closer to Fujimoto. She's trying to hide this monster-like part of herself from her husband, but the audience can see it. As I said, the creators went out of their way to depict this woman's monstrosity. So, as you all can see, she can shrink and grow at will, but that alone isn't enough to explain some other mysterious scenes in the movie. One of them is when Grandma Mare and Sosuke's mother, Lisa, have a private conversation. It's toward the very end of the movie. Grandma Mare and Lisa are standing and talking. The grannies in the retirement home are observing them from afar, wondering aloud, what are they discussing for so long? We can't tell. Grandma Mare's size makes her look a little scary. I guess there's no reason why she should shrink to match Lisa's size. She's kind of intimidating, but that's what I like about her. The grannies call out to Lisa, and then Lisa waves and responds, "Coming!" As you can see here. Grandma Mare gives a quick side glance this way too. As Lisa starts to walk toward us, she walks around the flower beds. I mean, why are these flower beds there in the first place? I checked the storyboard, and there they were, with a note that said, Lisa walks around the flower beds. There must be a reason as to why they went to the trouble of making her do that. So, why did Miyazaki put the flower beds there? And it's not just this scene. This is where Sosuke and Ponyo finally see Grandma Mare's face to face. But look, there are flower beds here as well. Grandma Mare appears on the right and approaches them, but stops short of the flower beds before starting the conversation. You see, Grandma Mare never ever shows her feet or legs to the audience. It's because... well, to start with, why can she shrink and grow at will in the sea? For that matter, why does she even glow? Miyazaki gives a very clear answer in this book. The Wind Returns, second volume. It's a collection of his interviews. In it, Miyazaki reveals that Grandma Mare is actually a deep-sea angler fish. So, she's a monster. A huge deep-sea angler fish, about 1 kilometer long. That's the true nature of Grandma Mare. And Ponyo is the result of crossbreeding between this huge anglerfish and a male human. So, 2 different species mated and produced an offspring. You can see that in some Japanese folktales, like The Crane Wife and Crane's Return of a Favor, where a human has a child with a non-human. Miyazaki explains that this crossbreeding is essential to the story of Ponyo. He actually looks delighted explaining it, saying they crossbred. She's a deep-sea anglerfish, you know, about 1 kilometer long. So, what is this anglerfish like? I'm sure many of you already know. But here, this is the true nature of Grandma Mare. It's a deep-sea fish. It has really sharp teeth, and this antenna protruding from its head emits something called luminescent liquid around its tip. That's why it glows deep in the ocean. The tip right here is actually what we see of Grandma Mare. This part takes the form of a woman, and it's connected to the body of this humongous 1 kilometer long, grotesque, deep-sea creature. As I said, Grandma Mare is connected to the body of a deep-sea anglerfish. This anglerfish has an antenna that glows in the deep sea, and that's how it lures prey. In the same way, Grandma Mare transforms the tip of its antenna into the body of a very beautiful woman in order to lure male humans and crossbreed. Miyazaki explains in the book I mentioned earlier, as well as in other interviews, that Grandma Mare has many other husbands besides Fujimoto. This is to say that she is voracious and lecherous. She likes to mate with as many partners as possible. He goes on to say that Ponyo and Grandma Mare are like that. Then, where are the other men besides Fujimoto? Are they living in the sea in some corner of the world like him, always longing for a visit by Grandma Mare? The answer's probably not. Why? Well, that's to do with the fact that Grandma Mare is actually an anglerfish, and how a female and male anglerfish mate is rather peculiar. I got this image from National Geographic. It says the male integrates itself into the female after it bites. So, the male anglerfish embeds itself into the female's body as a parasite and becomes nothing more than a bump in her body. Its tissues adhere to the female flesh in the process and will never be detached. So, the male anglerfish becomes a parasite in the female and will stay this way for the rest of its life. The female anglerfish emits chemicals into the water to lure a male, who is just a fraction of the female in size. And the male depends on these chemicals to find the female. Once it does, the male bites into any part of the female body, and in that instant, its tissues and circulatory system begin to fuse with the female's flesh. From then on, the male receives nutrients from the female's blood, and its eyes and fins and most of its organs start to degenerate and disappear. Eventually, it will only exist as an organ to produce sperm whenever the female is ready to spawn. And this is what makes anglerfish so unique. If Miyazaki took the trouble to make Grandma Mare an anglerfish, it only makes sense to assume that all the other husbands have already been absorbed into her. Then, why hasn't Fujimoto been absorbed yet? According to brochures and books about Ponyo, Fujimoto is a surviving crew member of the submarine Nautilus from the novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. In the scene where Fujimoto is extracting what he calls the sea elixir, we see the year 1871 labeled on the oldest urn. So, why just put a specific year on this urn? This specific date on the urn has a connection to what I just said about his setting. The reason for this is because Jules Verne's novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was published in 1870. And it is accounted in the book, which reads like a non-fiction, that the Nautilus sank in the ocean around that time. In that same year, 1870, Grandma Mare supposedly saved Fujimoto, and ever since then, he has been purifying seawater to store up the potion of life. We can assume that he filled up the first urn in 1971. So, Fujimoto used to be a crew member of the submarine Nautilus. Miyazaki has called it a hidden subplot, but he's mentioned this out in the open on so many occasions, so we can trust it to be the case. And that's the reason why Grandma Mare hasn't absorbed Fujimoto yet, because he's been useful to her. Oh, I'm sorry, it was 1871. My bad. So, for Fujimoto, Grandma Mare is his beloved wife, but at the same time, a terrifying figure because she will probably absorb him once he's no longer useful to her. Supposedly, there are many other husbands, but since we only see Fujimoto making the potion of life, the other men have either died or already been integrated into Grandma Mare's body, which I think is most plausible since Grandma Mare is actually an anglerfish. So, as Fujimoto gets older and is no longer able to work on what he's been doing, he'll probably be absorbed by Grandma Mare. His tissues will adhere to her flesh and finally be integrated into her body. But it's a mystery how Fujimoto will react when that actually happens. Maybe he will be terrified and resistant, but having seen him in the film, I think it may even make him happy. So, going back to what I was saying earlier, all of this leads me to believe that behind those flower beds, there's probably a huge antenna, and that antenna is connected to... Let me mark it. There's the body of a deep-sea anglerfish, like this. And right here. We can't see it, but there's an antenna here. And that's the reason why Lisa took the trouble to walk around the flower beds, so not to step on this antenna. But the audience who are pleasantly watching the movie can't see it because of the flower beds. And that's precisely the creator's purpose, to hide the antenna from the audience. Ponyo is designed in a way that the audience watching it doesn't realize how Sosuke is entering into a weird contract with a creepy creature. But why does Sosuke bind himself to this contract that says he must love the mermaid, Ponyo, forever and should always protect her? Here's Miyazaki's answer. He said, because Sosuke is a kid. Let me explain. He says adults can never promise such a thing. Even if they do, they'll never be able to keep that promise. Some may ask, so what happens to a kid when he grows up? Miyazaki's answer is unequivocal. A kid grows up to be a foolish adult. Without exception, all kids grow up to be dull. Foolish adults. That's why kids are amazing. That's Miyazaki's top classic logic, you see. He says Sosuke is still a kid. He hasn't become this foolish adult yet, and that's why he can promise he'll love Ponyo forever and will always protect her. Only a kid would make such a reckless promise, and only a kid would actually try to keep it. Miyazaki says Sosuke will be in deep trouble for the rest of his life. Ha 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 ha! You can actually see him laughing out loud as he makes the comment in this documentary called The Work of Hayao Miyazaki. It was on NHK's documentary series, The Professionals. He bursts into laughter saying, there are some hardships in store for Sosuke. Ha 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 ha. So, according to Miyazaki, Sosuke is screwed. Then, why does Miyazaki say that the movie has a happy ending, even though Sosuke binds himself into trouble? You see, I find it really interesting, or rather scary, I guess. So, for Miyazaki, all women are scary. It's not just Grandma Mare. And her antenna is not the scary part. No, Grandma Mare is scary because she's a woman. And for Miyazaki, all women are like Grandma Mare, scary, incomprehensible, but at the same time strong and beautiful. Once you fall in love with a woman, you will be at her mercy for the rest of your life. That's how Miyazaki expresses his view on women in this movie. Now, take a look at this scene. Lisa is having a conversation with Grandma Mare, but what they're talking about isn't revealed to the audience because they're so far away. This scene struck me as very strange, because why include this scene at all if we can't know what they're saying? Why not cut it out? But this scene goes on forever, and its lengthiness is specified in the storyboard as well. Which would only mean that Miyazaki wants us to imagine what they're discussing, even if we can't hear them. Towards the end of the movie, Sosuke's town is hit by a huge tsunami and is submerged, but for some reason, everybody's alive and well. Everything seems so peaceful, and even Sosuke's father's ship safely comes back to the port. The ship came back in one piece thanks to Grandma Mare. In their secret conversation, Grandma Mare probably offers Lisa a deal. I will give you back your husband in exchange for your son Sosuke. This character, Lisa, well, she's a type of woman that cares more about a fight with her husband than preparing a meal for her son. She likes to drive recklessly even when her son is in the car. She also makes him call her by her name Lisa rather than mom. So, of all the women that appear in Miyazaki's films, Lisa is one of the least motherly figures, to the point that it even seems a little unnatural. She's depicted as more of a woman than a mother. So, Grandma Mare secretly proposes to Lisa, I will give you back your husband, but in return, you must give me your son. But don't worry, I'm not going to take him away from you. You just need to accept the condition of my daughter Ponyo living with Sosuke under your roof from now on. I actually think Lisa would see this as a fair deal. Of course, this conversation is hidden from the audience, but Miyazaki wanted to at least show us these women were up to something. He's sending us a warning. Women's private conversations always lead to men's misery. So that's what's happening in this strange scene. It's not just Grandma Mare who's strong and scary and beautiful, but so are Lisa and Ponyo, and women in general. That's the theme. All women are strong and scary and beautiful. Once you fall in love with a woman, you can't fight her. You break your back for her because you're madly in love with her. But once you become useless, she'll probably dump you or absorb you. Fujimoto knows this. That's why he always has bags under his eyes. In fact, all adult men have bags under their eyes, just like Fujimoto. He's perfectly aware of his fate, as seen by these bags. Sosuke, on the other hand, is still clueless about his fate. That's why he seems so pure and lively. Having shown all that, the movie ends abruptly. Sosuke and Ponyo kiss, and boom, the end. They live happily ever after, and the end credits roll in with this upbeat, jolly song. Ponyo, 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 fishy in the sea. Tiny little fishy, who could you really be? Just like that, the movie ends! Alright, that's it for today's free part. Okay. Yeah, so the first part of my analysis of Ponyo ends here. Now I'll talk about the theme of Ponyo and analyze the story more in depth for subscribers. If you're a subscriber to my channel on Nico Nico, you have access to all of my past videos until September. So I advise you to join the channel now, watch any episodes you want while you can. Now the questionnaire. So I'll do an in-depth analysis of Ponyo in the second part. And I'll talk about Castle in the Sky next week, and on September 8th, I'll talk a bit more about Ponyo and my visit to the US. And on the 15th, I'll talk about Spirited Away. On the 22nd, it'll be Scary Stories Part 2. And I'm gonna record a video in advance to stream it on the 29th. Okay, let me see the comments. Wow, this many, thanks a lot! Yeah, Ponyo is actually a very scary story. I'll talk about this in the second half. The thing is, if you ignore the scary parts, this movie becomes kind of boring. The animation itself is amazing, of course. I love the scene where countless jellyfish appear in the beginning and where Ponyo comes running towards us on the waves. But story-wise, it's sort of boring and slow. It makes you go, huh? But in order to understand the movie, we have to dig in deeper and watch Ponyo from a psychoanalytical point of view, just as the title of this video suggests. So this time I will focus on psychoanalyzing instead of just dissecting the story as usual. I call it the Miyazaki syndrome. And if you watch the movie to psychoanalyze this syndrome, it's fascinating. But if you watch it in a normal way, it all sounds like a senile man talking nonsense. But the movie is made like that on purpose, you see. So, if you don't realize that, watching it will feel like listening to your grandpa whose story just doesn't make sense. I'll talk more about it in the second half. Now, I'll read a letter from my viewer by the name of Saitama. Hi, I have a question. Which do you enjoy more, making anime or watching anime made by someone else? I'm sure making anime is demanding work, but watching the series Natsuzora and listening to you makes me wonder if the best way to enjoy anime is actually to make one. I've never experienced creative passion nor been part of a creative team. Is consuming the end product the same as eating someone else's leftovers? Please tell me your thoughts as someone who has both been a creator and an anime watcher. Without a doubt, watching anime someone else has made is more enjoyable. I'm serious. Because you can choose the anime you want to watch, and if it turns out to be a dud, you just leave it. But when you create anime, the only way to find out whether it's going to be good or not is to actually make it. And sometimes you don't even find out till you're well into the project. Of course, there are times you can just tell from the very beginning, but there are also cases like the storyboard looks boring, but all my colleagues are so excited about it and are all ready to make it happen. It's like when you don't like the first episode of an anime, but at school all your classmates say they loved it, so you keep watching it. But in the end, you just can't get into it and leave it. It's the same with anime creators. When we start making an anime, we think it's gonna be great, but often it turns out different from expectations. It may look really interesting in the planning phase, but when you actually start making it, you often think, where did we go wrong? You talk about being part of a creative team, but that can just be anything. For example, working part-time at some store. There are talented people everywhere who come up with interesting ideas. All you have to do is go along with them when that happens. But who knows? Once you become part of the team who wants to, say, start a business, it may turn out to be hell. Creating something truly interesting always comes from a huge risk. So if you want to just have a good time in the safest, most efficient way, being a consumer is the way to go, I think. But I think another way to really enjoy something is to imagine that you're the creator. For example, if there's a manga you like, instead of just reading it again, you can recreate the panels in a notebook with your own outlines and dialogues. Do the same with your favorite anime. Instead of just watching it again, you make your own storyboard. Trust me, you learn a lot by doing this, and watching anime or reading manga becomes infinitely more interesting. What I'm getting at is pretending to be a creator really helps because you learn so much in the process. I'm serious. But always keep in mind when you interact with professional creators that they're on a whole different level. So try to be respectful. Alright, you get 2 Towelboy stickers. Next letter is from Monstera Midori. Good evening, Mr. Okada. Good evening. I'm writing for the first time. I was never a big fan of Miyazaki's films because they often confused me. But thanks to your video commentaries, I have come to love these films. Well, today's analysis was a scary one. I'll be looking forward to your analysis of Spirited Away also. Right now, there's an exhibition of Isao Takahata, the co-founder of Ghibli, and I want to watch his films before going there. Please tell me his must-see films in the order of priority. By the way, I love Cowboy. He's adorable. Please let me see more of him. Alright, then I'll let Cowboy take over from here to give you a list of must-see films by Takahata. I'll tell you, Midori, must-see film number 1 is 3,000 Leagues in Search of Mother, all 52 episodes. Number 2, Heidi, Girl of the Alps, all 52 episodes. I hear ya. It takes real commitment to watch all the episodes, but prominent anime directors like Yoshiyuki Tomino and Miyazaki say Takahata's true quality as a director is seen in his TV anime series. They're basically saying Takahata's anime films are boring. So if you're serious about studying his works, make sure to watch his anime series, but in case you insist on watching the films, here goes number 3, Grave of the Fireflies, and number 4, The Great Adventure of Horus, Prince of the Sun. I'd love to go to the exhibition too, but there's no time. Anyway, take 2 of my stickers. See ya! Alright, that's it for today. Been a while since we saw Cowboy, right? Well, today's free video ends here. Bye bye.